When discussing monarchies, the infamous French Revolution must be mentioned. The French Revolution was so vast, intricate, and complicated that no one single video can be made about it. There have been many lies and half-truths told about Marie Antoinette. Usually, she is singled out as one of the main causes for the French Revolution. Historians often depict Marie Antoinette wearing elaborate dresses, using crazy hairstyles, and just being over the top with regards to her appearance altogether. Most historians say that her extravagant lifestyle and reckless spending helped bankrupt France and outrage the populace. The first half of the video will focus on the background and lifestyle of Marie Antoinette. The second half of the video will cover the treatment that Marie Antoinette and her children faced during the revolution. A note in advance, I spent quite a bit of time researching for this video, so it should be relatively accurate. With that being said, there were so many small details about Marie Antoinette's life and the French Revolution that by this point I probably slipped up on at least one detail. I tried to be as factual as possible, but I also tried to cover so many different events and details over so many different years that there is a good chance something somewhere is inaccurate. If there are any inaccuracies, please feel free to note them in the comment section. Also, I tried to make this video as comprehensive as possible, but the more I research, the more interesting deals about her keep popping up. It seems there is no end to the incredibly important details related to the French Revolution that most historians just never mention. At a certain point, no matter how many interesting facts remain, I'm just going to have to stop researching and record the video, because otherwise I could end up researching for literal months before making a video. Please do not take this as a complete and exhaustive account of Marie Antoinette's life, because there are certainly going to be many incredibly important facts I just didn't have the time to research and include. With that being said, let's begin Section 1. Section 1. Marie Antoinette's birth and background. Marie Antoinette was born in 1775 in Vienna, Austria. She was given the name Maria Antonia Josepha Joanna, Archduchess of Austria. She was the 11th daughter of the Habsburg Empress Marie Theresa of Austria and the Holy Roman Emperor Francis I. Her parents had 15 children total. Maria Antonia was the 14th child. If you think that sounds like a lot of children, as a traditional Catholic, let me assure you that 15 children is nothing. 12 children is considered to be the rough average number of children a traditional Catholic couple has, so having 15 children really isn't very impressive by our standards. And yes, Marie Antoinette was, and her parents were Catholic. There is a joke in traditional Catholic circles that when a traditional Catholic husband and wife have their first child, all the other traditional Catholics tell them, "Your first child, that's a nice start. Now, where are the other 11? Anyway, the young princess was said to be a very frivolous and outgoing girl. She greatly preferred attending social gatherings to studying or improving herself. Studying was definitely not her favorite pastime. In other words, Maria Antonia was the stereotypical silly girl we all knew who was constantly giggling, talking to her friends, and found practical, important matters very boring. However, she was reportedly a somewhat sweet and charming girl. Maria Antonia loved music when she was young. She played the harpsichord and flute and was an excellent dancer. Mozart played the piano for the Austrian royal family when he was 7 years old. While the 7-year-old Mozart was with the Austrian royal family, he tripped, and Maria Antonia caught him. The 7-year-old Mozart then announced that when he was an adult, he would marry Maria Antonia. However, Maria Antonia ended up engaged to Louis XVI of France instead. France and Austria were passive-aggressive enemies, yet both countries agreed to an uneasy alliance sealed by marriage. It was decided the marriage would occur between the French Prince Louis XVI and the Archduchess Maria Antonia. Maria Antonia was told at the age of 14 that she was to marry the French prince whom she had never met. As soon as the engagement was settled, Maria Antonia was prepared by the French for her marriage. She was given the French-sounding name Marie Antoinette. More importantly, the French designers began styling dresses for her according to French customs, started changing her hairstyles, and ordered her to wear lots of whatever that face makeup stuff is. I'm a man, I don't keep track of the names of that kind of stuff or bother remembering it. Anyway, this is a key detail many historians do not mention. Paris was considered to be the fashion capital of the world. Not looking absolutely ridiculous there in Paris was seen as odd. Marie Antoinette was ordered to completely change her appearance to suit French standards, which were completely unknown to her up until that time. Mozart, visiting Marie Antoinette after her French transformation, was astonished at how different she looked. Mozart, like Marie Antoinette, was an Austrian. Mozart remarked that the French lady's style of dressing, particularly the lavish amounts of hair powder and rouge, were, quote, unbearable to the eyes of an honest German, end quote. Despite the fact that Mozart ended up becoming a Freemason, and therefore a sworn enemy of the Catholic Church, it must be admitted he had a point in this matter. Marie Antoinette was only 14 years old when she left her family and entered France. Unsurprisingly, Marie Antoinette would write several letters to her mother over the course of her life. This was probably due to the fact that she did not actually get to be around and learn from her mother as she was growing up. In fairness, there is a question about whether Marie Antoinette really liked her mother that much. The Empress, Marie Antoinette's mother, was said to be a no-nonsense woman. For the Habsburgs, duty came before familial love. Marie Antoinette once said as an adult, quote, "I love the Empress, but I'm frightened of her. Even at a distance, when I'm writing to her, I never feel completely at ease." End quote. Nevertheless, the fact remains that as Marie Antoinette was growing up into a young lady, she did not have her parents around to help guide her. To top this off, when Marie Antoinette arrived in France, she was to some extent viewed with mild suspicion by the French for her Austrian heritage. This was a stigma she would never shed. Despite this, the young, pretty, and outgoing Marie Antoinette was well received for the first few years she was in France. Prince Louis XVI and Princess Marie Antoinette were married in 1770 Anno Domini. At the time of the marriage, Prince Louis XVI was 15 years old, and Marie Antoinette was 14 years old. Marie Antoinette was shipped off to a foreign country at the age of 14 and entered into an arranged marriage at the same time. She also described her husband as meek and coy when she first met him. When it comes to her marriage, Marie Antoinette and her husband were not exactly close at first. After all, it was an arranged marriage and they were only 14 and 15 years old respectively when they approached the altar. Marie Antoinette was still a very outgoing, frivolous girl who loved parties and socializing. She was the typical extrovert girl. Louis XVI, on the other hand, was the typical introverted guy. He preferred to spend his time learning about simple, practical, and boring matters. Despite this apparent lack of initial chemistry, however, Marie Antoinette's husband, Louis XVI, in case you are wondering, never took a mistress. Marie Antoinette's husband was faithful to her his entire life, and there are no records of either Marie Antoinette or Louis XVI cheating on each other, which is actually pretty rare for monarchs in France at that time. This did not mean, however, they found each other's company incredibly exciting at first. While Louis would go to bed early in the evenings, Marie Antoinette would often stay up late into the night partying and gambling with nobility. Some reports indicate that Marie Antoinette ended up feeling very lonely in her marriage. At least at first. Marie Antoinette was the 14th of 15 children. She had grown up with many close relatives. Yet at the age of 14, she had been completely separated from her relatives and was now alone in France. She was the queen, true, but she was in a somewhat loveless marriage, and especially with her extroverted nature and her husband's introverted nature, she probably felt rather lonely. This is probably part of the reason for why she would try to stay up late and have parties. Despite her love of parties and frivolousness, Marie Antoinette possessed a sympathetic heart. In one of her letters to her mother, Marie Antoinette mentioned that she did feel very sorry for the people of France. Marie Antoinette was also said to be very involved with charities. It was common knowledge that if Queen Marie Antoinette heard about your sufferings, she would try to do something to help you. Marie Antoinette was especially fond of supporting charities that helped people who had nowhere else to turn, such as unwed mothers. It was said Marie Antoinette was involved with charities from the moment of her arrival in France until her execution. She also, quote-unquote, adopted many peasant children, helping pay for their needs and expenses, etc. Shortly after her coronation, Marie Antoinette said, quote, "It is at the same time amazing and wonderful to be so well received 2 months after the riots, and in spite of the high price of bread which unfortunately continues. It is certain that when people who are suffering treat us so well, we are even more obligated to work for their happiness." End quote. Her husband also later decided not to have court celebrations for two upcoming royal weddings. Quote, "To justify this break in spending money," Marie Antoinette's husband said, quote, "Money will be saved, but far more essential, a good example will be set for the people who have suffered so much from this high cost of bread. Luckily, hope is returning, the wheat fields look very good, and bread is sure to be cheaper once the crop is in." At one point, Marie Antoinette was presented with an enslaved child from Senegal. She was told this slave was to become her servant. Marie Antoinette not only refused to make this slave her servant, but in fact adopted him and had him baptized into the Roman Catholic Church as Jean Amilcar. She placed Jean in a boarding school at St. Cloud and funded his education. Sadly, Jean Amilcar was kicked out of the boarding school after Marie Antoinette was executed and could no longer support Jean financially. Jean Amilcar died soon after. Chances are your history professors never told you that Marie Antoinette adopted a would-be slave and paid for his education. Madame du Barry, on the other hand, forced her Indian servant to perform as an African savage for her own personal entertainment. Who was Madame du Barry? Madame du Barry was the mistress of the French king Louis XV. This presented a bit of a tricky situation for Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette despised du Barry. Why? Fornication is a mortal sin in Catholicism. This meant that the king was living in mortal sin. But just like the majority of Europeans, Marie Antoinette was a firm Catholic. Marie Antoinette was absolutely furious that the king and du Barry were flagrantly committing mortal sin for the entire kingdom to see. Even worse, du Barry was relishing the attention she was getting at court, and had become somewhat power-hungry. Du Barry had a great deal of influence over the king. Marie Antoinette was furious that such a harlot as du Barry held such influence over France. Marie Antoinette refused to speak to du Barry in public or even acknowledge her existence. Many people urged Marie Antoinette to talk to du Barry, as it was said that Marie Antoinette refusing to talk to du Barry would be seen as criticism of the king's fornication. This is one of the problems that can pop up in monarchy, as I pointed out in the Common Objections to Monarchy video. Even when a king is doing something horribly wrong, in this case committing the mortal sin of fornication, the people are often too respectful of the king to point out that he needs to amend his ways. Similarly, pretty much no one criticized the king for living in mortal sin with du Barry. Marie Antoinette, as the princess in line to be the Queen of France, didn't just go along with this like everyone else did. She refused to acknowledge or even speak to du Barry. Du Barry complained to the king about Marie Antoinette's frigid attitude towards her, and Marie Antoinette was told to speak to du Barry by her mother, the Empress, so that the king would not grow displeased with Marie Antoinette and threaten her place in court. Marie Antoinette was absolutely frigid and furious that she'd been ordered to do this by her mother, but once remarked in passing to du Barry, quote, "There are many people at Versailles today." End quote. Now that Marie Antoinette had spoken to du Barry, even if just briefly, the stigma over du Barry was lifted. Marie Antoinette never spoke to du Barry again, though. Marie Antoinette was also said to be well-read. As can already be partially observed from her visits with Mozart, she loved music. One of Marie Antoinette's favorite musicians was Joseph, sorry if I butcher his name, but Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier de Saint Georges. Joseph was a black man who almost became the first black director of the Paris Opera House, but he lost out due to racism. 3 musicians from the Paris Opera House approached Marie Antoinette with a signed petition refusing to take orders from a person of color. Joseph withdrew his application to avoid making the Queen the target of further criticism. Marie Antoinette attended many of Joseph's operas, and Joseph was a regular guest of the Queen. Joseph even became one of Marie Antoinette's music teachers. During the Reign of Terror, Joseph was imprisoned for 11 months thanks to his friendship with the Queen. Marie Antoinette and her husband became King and Queen of France in 1774. Louis XVI was only 19 years old when he became king. Marie Antoinette was only 18 years old when she became queen. As Queen of France, Marie Antoinette had roughly 3 jobs. The first job was staying faithful and loyal to her husband. The second job was producing heirs for the throne to ensure the continuation of the royal line. Securing heirs was far more important than most people realize. The third job was to honor and reflect well on God and the crown. Notice that the ruling of the country of France is listed nowhere in these 3 jobs. Marie Antoinette had really no say in the overall governance of France whatsoever. To sum this up, Marie Antoinette was really just expected to be a gracious lady who had children and was faithful to her husband. In some ways, her extroverted, outgoing nature suited her well for this role. However, despite her extroverted nature, Marie Antoinette struggled with a lack of privacy at Versailles. From the time she woke up and was dressed in the morning by her maids, to the time she went to bed and was undressed by her maids, Marie Antoinette was practically never alone. Apparently, as a teenager in the French court, she wrote to her mother, complaining that she had practically no privacy whatsoever at Versailles. When he became king, Louis XVI tried to appease her in this regard by giving her a section of the palace grounds for herself. This section of land was called Petit Trianon. Apologies again to the French people if I'm butchering that. Marie Antoinette had a small romanticized version of a French countryside village built on Petit Trianon entirely for herself. She reportedly loved this area and spent quite a great deal of time boating, walking through the land, and enjoying watching the animals and gardens there. There were some caveats. The animal enclosures were kept well away from the houses on the property, so Marie Antoinette never had to deal with any of the filthy smells that often accompany animals. The few animals allowed into the grounds were all bathed in perfume, and staff followed them to quickly pick up any droppings. Marie Antoinette also loved collecting the eggs from the chickens. However, the eggs were all washed before she ever touched them. None of this improved her reputation with the people of France. Indeed, rumors began to spread that the house Marie Antoinette used inside Petit Trianon had walls paved with gold and diamonds. While it is true that Marie Antoinette was probably somewhat spoiled and pampered as a princess, this wasn't all necessarily her fault. To a large extent, Marie Antoinette had lived in palaces her entire life, and she had been so carefully sheltered from the real world that she really just didn't know much about life outside of palaces. Now it is time to address the claims that Marie Antoinette lived an opulent lifestyle that helped to bankrupt France. Did Marie Antoinette live a life of luxury and privilege? The answer is both yes and no. Building an entire fake village for herself obviously shows that she was used to a life of luxury. Interestingly enough, during her eventual trial at the hands of the revolutionaries, building the village was the one thing she admitted she had been mistaken in, confessing that it had perhaps been a waste of money. With that being said, the Trianon was traditionally given to the favorite of a king. It usually belonged to a mistress. Remember, I mentioned earlier that practically every French monarch had a mistress. Louis XIV built what he called Grand Trianon, a very fancy house, for his mistress. Louis XV built Petit Trianon, another fancy house for Tuileries. And so Marie Antoinette was hardly the first person to spend money building house or houses for herself. Look at how many estates wealthy billionaires own today. They often own multiple houses in multiple different locations. And in this case, Marie Antoinette just had Versailles, which wasn't really hers because, quite literally dozens, if not hundreds of people lived and worked in Versailles. But then she just had this one little village area for herself. A personalized village is still something that no normal person could ever hope to reasonably afford, though. However, it is important to remember that, as stated earlier, Marie Antoinette was under constant scrutiny at the French court. Every aspect of life there was controlled down to the millimeter in Versailles. It wasn't as if Marie Antoinette just was able to wander around Versailles doing whatever she felt like. She was expected to be on her best behavior at all times, and to constantly act as a queen should. In a certain sense, being a queen in Versailles was exhausting because she was constantly on display. Think of a soldier who stands at attention and marches perfectly throughout the day. Now imagine that soldier has no personal time, no alone time. Every second of their day, from the minute they get up to the moment they go to sleep, is monitored. This soldier never graduates boot camp, they never get weekends to themselves. Every single waking hour is spent appearing perfect. This is similar to what Marie Antoinette had to undergo as a queen at Versailles. Petit Trianon was the one place that Marie Antoinette could go to take a break from it all, without the pressures of anyone watching her or making sure that she conformed perfectly to palace life. In a certain sense, this was probably a waste of money, but considering how perfect her behavior must have been inside Versailles, it is hard to blame her for wanting a place to take a break from it all. Now for the dresses. Marie Antoinette did dress luxuriously on many occasions. However, there were some caveats. The first caveat was that she dressed pretty much exactly how the French queens were supposed to dress. Remember, the French designers controlled the clothes that Marie Antoinette wore for many years. Mozart himself was not always happy with how opulent the French designers had made his friend look. When Marie Antoinette did try to wear simple dresses, she was often ridiculed for quote-unquote not dressing appropriately for her office. After all, French queens had been wearing the over-the-top dresses for years, so when Marie Antoinette ever wore simple dresses, people often believed and started spreading rumors that Marie Antoinette was not acting appropriately given her station. Marie Antoinette actually stopped wearing such heavy face makeup that the French people at court were used to. She also began the practice of wearing simpler, more feminine dresses. Both these changes were greeted by horror from the older generations of French women at the court who were very used to heavy face makeup and incredibly expensive clothing. In one occasion, Marie Antoinette posed for a portrait wearing a simple, inexpensive dress. People who saw the portrait, at least nobility, grumbled that Marie Antoinette did not dress in the portrait in a manner befitting her office. The second complaint was that the simple dress Marie Antoinette wore in the portrait was rather immodest and that it was somewhat easy to see through the fabric. This portrait was actually taken down and altered to try to dispel the rumors. Then people started talking about how extravagant and over-the-top Marie Antoinette was while the poor people of France were starving. Many historians like to make it sound as if the French courtiers never spent that much money, and then Marie Antoinette came along. According to these historians, suddenly, Marie Antoinette personally skyrocketed the clothing and jewelry bills, the expenses and costs of which had never been seen before in the French court. Absurd. Marie Antoinette spent pretty much the same amount of money that past French queens had been spending up until that point. France had been experiencing problems with debt and overspending long before Marie Antoinette ever entered the scene. With that being said, Marie Antoinette actually tried to help the French people cut down on spending. This is a crucial piece of information that is suspiciously left out of most history lessons. Keep in mind, Marie Antoinette became queen at the age of 18, and she died at the age of 37, so she was going through all of this while she was still on the somewhat young side of life. Also keep in mind that throughout all of this, she was often hated for being an Austrian. Many of her detractors started spreading lies and rumors about Marie Antoinette throughout France. These lies included rumors that she had the walls paved with gold and diamonds in Petit Trianon, which was laughably false. Many pamphlets detracting her were spread throughout Paris. She was rumored to be taking part in lesbian orgies. It is said that pamphlets were distributed showing her taking part in lesbian orgies with many women, including her friend Princess de Lamballe. Despite the fact that Marie Antoinette was rumored to be a lesbian, she was also rumored to be cheating on her husband with other men. She was rumored to be having an affair with a dashing Swedish count, Axel Fersen. Axel Fersen and Marie Antoinette met as teenagers during the age of 16 at a ball. However, Marie Antoinette during a ball. However, Marie Antoinette was married to Louis XVI by then, since she got married at the age of 14. Many people suggested that the children of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were in reality fathered by Axel Fersen. It does seem to be true that Axel Fersen and Marie Antoinette were close and were fond of each other. Count Fersen even wrote to his sister, quote, "I have decided never to marry," It would be unnatural. I cannot belong to the one person I truly want, so I prefer to belong to nobody." End quote. When the royal family tried to escape Paris during the infamous flight to Varennes during the French Revolution, it was Count Fersen who planned the escape and made the arrangements. Despite this, there is no solid evidence that Marie Antoinette ever committed adultery with Fersen. Marie Antoinette, especially during the French Revolution, was very loyal to her husband. She even refused to evacuate France, insisting her place was with her husband. It seems that while Fersen did love Marie Antoinette, and Marie Antoinette was probably fond of Fersen, Marie Antoinette did not break her marriage vows. Despite the fact that many of these claims were baseless, this did not stop these rumors from spreading across France. One big scandal that caused problems for Marie Antoinette was a jewelry scandal. Some thieves forged Marie Antoinette's signature to help them scam and steal a valuable necklace. Marie Antoinette had nothing to do with this scam or theft. She was blamed for taking part in it anyway. Another note, the famous "let them eat cake" line never happened. Marie Antoinette never said "let them eat cake." That line was an anecdote from Jean-Jacques Rousseau's autobiography in the 1760s. In this autobiography, Rousseau talked about his encounter with a young Austrian princess. Quote, "At length I remembered the last resort of a great princess who, when told that the peasants had no bread, replied, 'Then let them eat brioches,' a rich cake like bread. The name of the princess was not specified." Most people believe that this encounter and line were fabricated entirely. Indeed, there is strong reason to believe that the entire autobiography was fictional. Some people believe that Rousseau probably referred to Queen Marie-Thérèse, the wife of Louis XIV, who lived a century prior. On top of this, Marie Antoinette was only 9 years old when that autobiography was made, and she had never been anywhere near France. Of course, that didn't stop yet another rumor from spreading about the unpopular queen, who was already having many other rumors circulate about her. Someone probably read the autobiography, read the line about the Austrian princess, and assumed that the book referred to Marie Antoinette. From there, the rumors among the French people grew, twisted, and spread until, according to the rumors, the adult Queen Marie Antoinette had just recently said, "Let them eat cake." It was completely false, but at that point the queen was so hated that any ill-sounding rumor about her was often believed. The nobles hated Marie Antoinette partly because she was Austrian, and partly because she tried to cut court spending. Despite her attempts to spread monetary reforms, Marie Antoinette was pretty much powerless. Many believe that one of the reasons that Marie Antoinette was judged so harshly was because many powerful people wanted the French king overthrown. The best way to have the king overthrown was to spread rumors about him in the streets. The problem was, criticizing the king might have been somewhat taboo. Criticizing the foreign Austrian queen, on the other hand, who did not have any real power, was another matter entirely. So if anyone wanted to make sure that the king was criticized, but could not directly spread rumors about the king, it was easy to instead spread rumors about the queen. For the most part, Marie Antoinette did not have much, if any, power in the French government. She did, however, urge her husband to ease the burden on the poor of France by raising taxes on the nobility. Louis XVI did attempt to raise taxes on the nobility, but the aristocrats of France threatened to revolt. Marie Antoinette also influenced her husband in his choice of who he appointed to some powerful positions in France. Marie Antoinette asked her husband to reinstate the popular financial minister, Jacques Necker. Jacques Necker had been dismissed, leading to the outrage of the public. Marie Antoinette hoped that by reinstating Necker, the public would be appeased. She was successful at having Necker reinstated, though as usual, no one gave her credit or changed their minds about her. When the Estates General met in 1789, Marie Antoinette was soon grieving from the death of her oldest son, Louis Joseph. Louis Joseph died of tuberculosis at the age of 7. When the riots first started breaking out, it was suggested that the royal family should be evacuated. Louis XVI refused to leave his kingdom, but agreed that his wife and children might leave. Marie Antoinette refused to leave, stating that her place was with her husband. She refused to leave him, even in the face of danger. When the French Revolution began, a women's mob broke into Versailles. They found Marie Antoinette huddled with her children in a room. The mob slaughtered the royal family's guards, mounted the guards' heads on spikes, and brought the royal family to Paris. Putting heads on spikes was a favorite pastime of the revolutionaries. Later on in the French Revolution, Marie Antoinette's friend, Princess de Lamballe, would refuse to take an oath against the monarchy. Since Princess de Lamballe refused to take an oath against the monarchy, the revolutionaries killed Princess de Lamballe, put her head on a spike, and paraded it past Marie Antoinette's prison windows. For now, Marie Antoinette wrote about her trip to Paris at the hands of the women's mob, saying, quote, "I hope, if there is no lack of bread, many things will be righted. I am in touch with the people, militiamen, market women. They all hold out their hand to me, and I hold out mine to them." End quote. The French Revolution was chaotic throughout. At least at the beginning of the revolution, it seemed many of the revolutionaries were not quite sure what to do with the royal family. Many of the revolutionaries seemed to toy with the idea of simply reducing the power of the king at first. The principles of the French Revolution were the Freemasonic principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Many of the everyday citizens at first simply wanted to gain more rights while keeping the king in power. The French people would begin addressing French men as citizen so-and-so, for example, Citizen Defarge, instead of Monsieur for the men and Citizeness for the women. So, beforehand, people would address each other as Monsieur or Madame. Now they just called each other Citizen or Citizeness. Many of the lower classes hoped that Louis XVI would accept a decrease of power and become a sort of citizen king, so to speak. The Freemasons, however, wanted all monarchies to be abolished entirely. For now, the royal family was accordingly brought to and imprisoned in the, again, sorry to the French people if I'm mispronouncing this, the Tuileries Palace in the city in Paris. Multiple armed guards patrolled the palace. The king was still allowed to act as a sort of figurehead, but was virtually powerless. As with many aspects of the revolution, the organization of the guarding of the royal family was pretty disorganized. This made an escape attempt seem feasible. There was an attempt to smuggle the royal family out of the country into Austria on the 20th of June 1971. This was the famous Flight of Varennes. It was planned by Count Axel Fersen, the man who had a massive crush on Marie Antoinette. The escape did not go as planned. At night, on the way out of the palace, Marie Antoinette was nearly discovered by the Marquis de Lafayette. Yes, that one and same Lafayette. Lafayette was acting as the head of the revolutionary soldiers guarding the palace the royal family was housed in. Lafayette was making rounds of the palace, and Marie Antoinette had to hide. She lost her way in the dark before eventually finding the carriage. Her mishap delayed the escape by at least half an hour. The royal family finally made it into the coach, but the coach traces broke during their travels and had to be repaired. This cost them another half hour. Their journey seemed to be beset by mishaps. As soon as it was daylight, the severely delayed coach was stopped in search in a French town. The postmaster recognized the king, and the jig was up. The carriage ride back to Paris was torturous. Jérôme Pétion and Antoine Barnave, two representatives of the new revolutionary government, sat in the carriage with the royal family. Barnave was reportedly chivalrous and kept up a steady flow of conversation with Marie Antoinette and the king's sister, Madame Elizabeth. Barnave grew to feel sorry for Marie Antoinette and kept up a correspondence with her. Later, Barnave grew to feel that the violence of the revolution had gone too far. Barnave submitted a secret plan for a counter-revolution to the royal family, but was eventually caught and killed by the revolutionaries. Jérôme Pétion, during the ride back to Paris, was a nightmare. During the carriage ride back to Paris, Pétion pulled the hair of the Dauphin, for those of you who don't know, that's French for prince, Louis XVII. Yes, a grown man in the revolutionary government spent the ride back to Paris pulling the hair of a child. Pétion also reportedly had revolutionary mottos inscribed on the buttons of the clothing he was wearing. Pétion forced the Dauphin to read the revolutionary mottos on the buttons out loud to everyone in the carriage. As if this wasn't enough, Pétion also believed the king's sister Marie Madame Elizabeth was flirting with him. Surprisingly, though, Pétion would actually later vote against having King Louis XVI executed. It is kind of interesting that even such a radical madman as Pétion thought killing the king would be a mistake. Regardless, during this carriage ride, Marie Antoinette had to undergo watching this utter humiliation of her son. At the time, Marie Antoinette was just 35 years old. We are told by historians this escape attempt made the people of Paris view the king as a traitor to his people. Kind of ridiculous, really, considering the fact the Parisians had literally captured the king and his wife and children and then held them under armed guard. In July of 1792, Austria and Prussia released the Brunswick Manifesto. In the manifesto, Austria and Prussia declared that they would destroy Paris if the French royal family was harmed. In response, on August 10th of 1972, the Tuileries Palace, which the royal family was staying in, was stormed by the Jacobins. The Swiss Guard assigned to defend the royal family were mercilessly slaughtered. The royal family was not yet killed, but they were moved from the palace to the Temple prison in Paris. The Temple prison was a sort of prison/fortress. Eventually, the king was killed following a long series of events that we don't have time to recount in this video. Marie Antoinette, still imprisoned in the Temple prison, was stricken with grief. Before her husband's death, Marie Antoinette would walk in the gardens of the prison daily. However, the way out of the palace into the gardens led past the chambers formerly used by her husband. Marie Antoinette refused to walk in the gardens after her husband's death because she could not bear to walk by her dead husband's now empty chambers. Before his execution, King Louis XVI was assured that his family would not be harmed. This promise was repeated to Marie Antoinette. She was told that her death would be a, quote, gratuitous horror which would be contrary to the revolution's policy, end quote. Of course, that promise was not kept, as we all know. Each day, Marie Antoinette and her remaining children gathered together to eat meals at a table. During these meals, Marie Antoinette would put her oldest, Louis XVII, on cushions in the seat at the head of the table. Many counter-revolutionaries in foreign countries now declared Louis XVII, as the oldest living son of Louis XVI, to be the new king of France. Indeed, a great deal of counter-revolutionary militias had sprung up in France. Remember, not all the peasants in France believed that the French Revolution was correct. Many of them still supported the monarchy and were outraged to hear what was happening in France. This is why many of them sprung up in revolt as a sort of counter-revolution against the revolutionaries. Just as the main bulk of the revolution's leadership were Freemasonic, such as Robespierre was a Freemason, and many of the Jacobins were Freemasons, the main bulk of the counter-revolutionary militias were Catholic. The Catholics in the, again, apologies if I mispronounce this, Vendée region of France, a western section of France near the ocean, fought the revolutionaries and succeeded in recapturing a large swath of West France. The Vendée Catholics explicitly announced that Louis XVII was the new king of France, and they intended to restore his throne. The Vendée Catholics, using the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary linked by a crown as their symbol, launched their revolution and had quite a few successes, actually. Many years later, the Catholic Society of St. Pius X, or SSPX, would adopt the same symbol as they believed Vatican II to be a sort of second French Revolution that they had to fight. Many other countries, such as Austria, Germany, Belgium, and England, were not happy that the French monarchy had been overthrown. Several of these countries had gone to war with France, and there was fighting on the borders in an attempt to topple the revolutionary government and restore the monarchy. These Catholics declared that when they had finished defeating the Freemasons, they would free Louis XVII and put him back on his throne. Naturally, the Freemasons didn't want to have Louis XVII made the second king of France. The Freemasons had begun the French Revolution with the express intention of overthrowing the monarchy of France and hopefully later on all the monarchies in the world. They accomplished that in World War I. Freemasonry had already been condemned by the Catholic Church years before, and the evils of that cult had been repeatedly denounced by the popes. In fact, many people in France were upset that the French kings had not outlawed Freemasonry. It was indeed a mortal sin for a Catholic to become a Freemason. The French had been rather lax in persecuting Freemasonry. Marie Antoinette's father, Emperor Francis I, was a Freemason. Marie Antoinette's mother, Marie Therese, hated Freemasons, however, and even sent the police to shut down a Freemasonic meeting that her husband was attending. The emperor reportedly had to run out the back door to avoid being caught by the police. King Louis XVI's brothers joined Freemasonic lodges as well. Princess de Lamballe, Marie Antoinette's close friend, though not a Freemason, was a grand mistress over all the lodges of the Cult of Adoption in France. Marie Antoinette first wrote of this group to her sister, saying, quote, "It is only a society of benevolence and pleasure." End quote. Marie Antoinette soon learned the truth of the matter, however, after being imprisoned during the French Revolution. While imprisoned, in a letter to her brother, who was the new Holy Roman Emperor after the death of her father, Marie Antoinette wrote, quote, "Beware of any association of Freemasons over there. It is by this way that all the monsters here intend to reach the same goal in all countries." End quote. Having Louis XVII be held up as the king to fight for did not suit the Freemasons' plans at all. Accordingly, some of the revolutionaries approached Marie Antoinette in the palace, or in the prison at this point that they were staying in. These revolutionaries told the queen that they had heard of a plot to kidnap Louis XVII. To protect Louis XVII, the revolutionaries said that they wished to separate Louis XVII from the rest of his family in a separate section of the prison. The catch was that neither Louis XVII nor the rest of his family would be allowed to see nor talk to each other. Marie Antoinette easily saw through the lie and desperately held tight to Louis XVII in her arms, refusing to let him go. The revolutionaries tried to coax Marie Antoinette. These revolutionaries assured Marie Antoinette that they did not want to take away Louis XVII from his family, but it had to be done for safety and security reasons. Marie Antoinette saw right through arguments for the safety/security lie, which makes her far smarter than the vast majority of people were in 2020. Eventually, the revolutionaries realized that Marie Antoinette was far smarter than most people from the year 2020, and so the revolutionaries dropped the farce of, "We just care about your safety and security." The revolutionaries threatened to kill Marie Antoinette if she would not give up Louis XVII. That did not sway the queen. She clung to her child all the more firmly. And I should have done more research here. One source I read said that they just tore Louis XVII from her arms at that point, and another source I read said that they threatened to kill her daughter, Marie Therese, and at that point Marie Antoinette gave in, so I'll have to look that up, and I'll post the answer in the top comment. Louis XVII was handed over to the revolutionary Antoine Simon. Antoine, sorry again to the French people if I'm mispronouncing that. Anyway, Simon regularly beat Louis XVII, and Simon also made Louis XVII drunk on alcohol. In case you haven't picked it up by this point, yes, the revolutionaries were mostly horrible people. Louis XVII was often starved, and there are reports that the guards made him sing revolutionary songs in the palace where his mother and his siblings could hear him sing. In the days after her son was taken away, Marie Antoinette would spend all day staring at the hallway, hoping to catch a glimpse of her son in case the revolutionaries brought him to walk into the gardens. There are reports that Marie Antoinette and the rest of her family could hear Louis XVII sobbing as he was beaten by the revolutionaries. Unfortunately, Marie Antoinette nor the rest of her family ever saw or spoke with her son again. The Freemasons now wanted Marie Antoinette dead. Oh, and yeah, by the way, if Louis XVII didn't sing in the hallway when they told him to sing revolutionary songs so that his mother and his family could hear him, then they wouldn't give him any food, so they would starve him. But now the Freemasons wanted Marie Antoinette dead. They tried to come up with some sham evidence to convict her in a kangaroo court. Okay, now if you are squeamish or do not want to hear R-rated material, which I can't really blame you for, then I would suggest you skip ahead here. I'm going to go ahead and give you about 5 seconds. You're probably going to hear it in the rest of the video either, but, you know, it's a bit of a shock what they did to Louis XVII. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are stories that the revolutionaries had prostitutes come and R-A-P-E the young Louis XVII. I had to spell it out that way because apparently that word is censored by the YouTube AI that tracks voices in the videos and creates subtitles. And you're not allowed to say that or they'll take the entire video down. Idiotic policy on YouTube's part, but then again, what can you expect from a company like Google? Google is one of the worst companies on the face of the planet. It's a real pity that they own such an important platform as YouTube. Anyway, back to the subject. Why would the revolutionaries force prostitutes on Louis XVII? During her sham trial, the revolutionaries claimed that Marie Antoinette had carried on an incestuous relationship with Louis XVII. We do know that the jailers of Louis XVII forced Louis XVII to sign documents stating that his mother had carried out an incestuous relationship with him. These documents were presented during the sham trial of Marie Antoinette. Many people believe the revolutionaries were trying to have the prostitutes infect Louis XVII with venereal disease. The revolutionaries could then in turn have blamed Marie Antoinette for infecting her son through incest. Though the stories about the prostitutes are unverified, many historians believe that it is very highly likely the revolutionaries tried that. Louis XVII would unfortunately eventually die thanks to the torture he underwent at the hands of the revolutionaries just 2 years later at the age of 12, I believe. Soon, Marie Antoinette was separated from all of her children and from her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, and moved from the palace to a prison called the Concierge. She was given practically no privacy in the concierge. One wall of her cell consisted of iron bars. This meant that many people passing by were allowed to jeer and gape in at the famous queen. The only privacy in the room that she had was a 4-foot-tall curtain she was allowed to dress herself behind and use the toilet behind. She was also only referred to during her stay in the concierge as Prisoner 280. During interrogation she underwent in the prison, Marie Antoinette repeatedly said that her only interests were in the safety of her children, and that her only enemies were those who wished to harm her children. Jacques-René Hebert, a revolutionary and radical journalist claiming to write on behalf of the people, insisted that Marie Antoinette must be killed. The Freemasons continued to push for their plans of completely eradicating the monarchy. Several of the revolutionaries met and decided that Marie Antoinette must be killed. As already discussed, to this end they forced Louis XVII, Marie Antoinette's son, to sign false confessions that Marie Antoinette had carried out an incestuous relationship with him. Horrified, Marie-Thérèse, the queen's daughter, and Madame Elizabeth, the former king's sister, wrote their own statements denouncing the incest accusations as lies. On the night of the 12th of October, Marie Antoinette was woken in the middle of the night. She was brought before the Revolutionary Tribunal to be indicted. She denied all the charges and was given the right to a defense counsel, and was returned to her cell. Of course, the revolutionaries had already decided her fate, though she did not know it. The trial was slated to begin on October the 14th, less than 2 days later. Again, this is a sham trial. They had already decided to kill her. They just needed to make things look good. Or they wanted to at any point. At any rate, they already looked horrible as it was, but they probably just didn't care. Marie Antoinette's lawyer urged her to write a letter, formally requesting 3 days to prepare a defense. Marie Antoinette wrote the letter, but the revolutionaries, who had already decided that she was to be killed, ignored her request, not even bothering to reply. When Marie Antoinette entered the courtroom on October the 14th, the public who saw her for the first time were shocked. The French public had been told that Marie Antoinette was a devilish, sinister-looking Austrian she-wolf, and they used the phrase Austrian she-wolf multiple times in the rumors. What they saw instead was a rather normal-looking, middle-aged woman wearing a widow's black dress, and she was somewhat sickly and thin thanks to her stay in prison. The trial against King Louis XVI had been somewhat formal, including signed papers and material witnesses. During Marie Antoinette's trial, the revolutionaries started to give up any pretense of being fair and honest. The accusations against Marie Antoinette were not firmly grounded in reality, but based on rumors. The first witness was a captain in the Versailles National Guard. He accused Marie Antoinette of participating in drunken orgies, but admitted that he had never actually seen her participate in these orgies. He had just heard about it. Another witness repeated a rumor he had heard that Marie Antoinette had made the Swiss guards drunk before the storming of the Tuileries palace. Again, this witness had not actually seen it, he was just repeating a rumor that he had heard. Marie Antoinette kept her responses during the trial brief, mostly responding, quote, "I do not recall," end quote, and "I never heard talk of anything like that." She was accused of personally convincing King Louis XVI to make the royal family flee Paris during their ill-fated escape attempt. The French revolutionaries' rumors painted Marie Antoinette as the Austrian she-wolf, single-handedly plotting to destroy France by controlling her husband. Marie Antoinette responded that she had never had such control over the king's decisions. During the trial, the prosecution presented documents that they claimed were signed by Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette asked what the dates on the documents were. It was revealed that the documents had been signed, apparently after Marie Antoinette was imprisoned. This meant that not only were the documents and signature forged, but whoever had tried to forge the documents hadn't even really bothered to put much thought into it. This again just goes to show how the revolutionaries had already decided to kill Marie Antoinette and were just casually and sloppily getting the formalities of the quote-unquote trial over with so they could hurry up and send her to the guillotine. The only time that Marie Antoinette admitted to any sort of wrongdoing was when questioned about whether too much money had been spent on her private residence, the French village replica Petit Trianon. The Queen responded by saying, quote, "Perhaps more was spent than I would have wished," end quote. When Marie Antoinette asked for the date, oh, yeah, I already mentioned this part. Let me see. Okay. Though the general public had been told that Marie Antoinette was the worst woman to set foot on the planet since Jezebel, everyone in the courtroom, it said, slowly began to realize that Marie Antoinette was really just an ordinary wife and mother. The fact that the trial was deliberately rigged against Marie Antoinette also started to become rather apparent. Hebert, realizing that people were catching on to Marie Antoinette's innocence and the villainous nature of the prosecutors, tried to drop the incest accusations on top of him like a big bombshell. He tried to say, oh, now we've got the bombshell evidence. She committed incest with her son. Marie Antoinette, who had remained very composed throughout the trial, as befits a queen, finally dropped her composure for just a brief moment. When Hebert tried to dramatically insist that Marie Antoinette had carried out an incestuous relationship with her son, the queen snapped at Hebert, quote, "Did you witness it?" End quote. Of course, Hebert had not, nor did he have any proof other than the accusations the revolutionaries had forced Louis XVII to sign. Marie Antoinette refused to comment any further on the charge. The tribunal's president questioned Marie Antoinette, asking why she refused to answer. Marie Antoinette responded, quote, "If I have not replied, it is because nature itself refuses to respond to such a charge laid against a mother." End quote. Marie Antoinette then made an emotional appeal to the mothers in the courtroom. Many of the mothers present in the courtroom called out for the trial to be stopped. The trial lasted until 11 p.m. that night, and then resumed at 8 a.m. the next day. The trial continued, with accusations being hurled that Marie Antoinette had fed French military secrets to Austria. This evidence was, though it is said that after she was imprisoned, Marie Antoinette did try to write to her mother about what the French army was doing, this evidence that they presented in court was very similar to the evidence that they had presented earlier. In other words, it was incredibly flimsy at best. And it was mostly just based, again, on rumors and hearsay. When she was asked if she had anything to add to her defense, Marie Antoinette reportedly said, quote, and I'd have to double check this quote, but anyway, "Yesterday I did not know the witnesses, I knew not what they were going to depose against me, and nobody has produced against me any positive fact. I finished by observing that I was only the wife of Louis XVI, and it was requisite in me to conform myself to his will." End quote. Perhaps Marie Antoinette knew now that she would be killed no matter what. It is said that on the morning of October 16th, Marie Antoinette had woken up to find out that her hair had turned white from shock and stress. Though it is, however, perhaps possible that her hair had already been graying, so she might not have gone from having pure blonde hair to just pure white hair overnight, but it is said that her hair did turn white from the shock and stress. At 4 a.m. on the morning of October 16th, Marie Antoinette was found guilty of 3 charges. The first charge was conspiring with foreign powers. The second charge was depletion of the state treasury. The third charge was committing high treason via acting against the security of the French state. Marie Antoinette was asked if she would like to make a statement. Without saying a word, she shook her head. The execution was scheduled for later that day. Once back in her cell, Marie Antoinette was given writing materials to say goodbye to her loved ones. One letter she wrote to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth. She told Madame Elizabeth how sad she was to leave her children, saying, quote, "You know that I have lived only for them and for you, my dear and tender sister." End quote. Marie Antoinette also mentioned that she would be soon joining Madame Elizabeth's brother, King Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette's late husband. Marie Antoinette also wrote to her daughter, Marie Therese, asking her to forgive her brother, her 10-year-old brother, Louis XVII's lies about the incest, saying, quote, "Think of his age and how easy it is to make a child say what one wants, even things he doesn't understand." End quote. It is said, however, that Marie Antoinette's writings did not reach their recipients. Marie Antoinette's letter to Madame Elizabeth was found under Robespierre's bed after his execution. For her execution, Marie Antoinette was forced to change clothes in front of her male guards. She was put in a very plain white dress for execution. Her hair was cut very short and her hands were tied. Marie Antoinette humiliatingly had to ask the guards permission to temporarily untie her hands so that she could relieve herself in a corner. She refused to take breakfast that morning, saying that everything was over for her. Unlike her husband, who was taken to the guillotine in a carriage, Marie Antoinette was taken to the guillotine in an open cart. When she ascended the steps of the guillotine, it is commonly reported that she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. Marie Antoinette then uttered her famous last words, quote, "Pardon me, sir, I did not mean to do it." End quote. Since the revolutionaries had tried to abolish the term monsieur and madame, Marie Antoinette was being polite to the guard or the executioner while still holding on to the traditional customs and refusing to address him as citizen. I will have to end the video now, but I will end by making a few statements. Just to reiterate what was said at the beginning of the video, this was by no means a complete account of Marie Antoinette's life. This was just scratching the surface. Each new piece of writing I found about her has more positive traits included about her. And true, she's not necessarily like some kind of superhero or anything like that. Well, I guess maybe you could say she is having to put up with all the suffering she went through during the French Revolution, but I mean, she's just like a normal woman, it seems. And it seems like every new piece of writing I find just mentions something new and good about her. One piece of writing will mention her extensive involvement in charities. Another writing will mention how she cut her own personal budget to ease court finances. Another writing will mention the sympathy that she expressed for the French people. And there are probably many more positive facts about her that I simply did not have the time to research and find. Now, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.